You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter @RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans. Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am the Jacob Valk, except no imitation. I'm going to do something on this show that I've never done before. You know how I promised you a Brooklyn Nets show tonight? It makes no sense for me to do a Brooklyn Nets show tonight. Why? Because the Nets are the biggest story in sports right now. So how can I do a regular episode of the Jacob Valk Show without talking about the biggest story in sports? It's impossible. I think this is the first time this has ever happened, where a team that I've said I'm going to do a show about becomes the biggest story in sports. I mean, the Nets were a story for a while, but it's really blown up over the weekend. I mean, they've lost 8 straight. They're the 7th seed now. James Harden trade rumors are flying around left and right. The Nets are by far and away the biggest story in sports. It's not even up for debate. And I think that's the first time this has ever happened. So, the way that I want you to think about this show is think about the Brooklyn Nets show as being the first part of this show, and then the other stuff like Caris LeVert and Mike McDaniel will be the second part. So I'm still giving you a Brooklyn Nets show. I'm just combining it with other stuff into one episode, the regular episode of the Jacob Valk Show. Think about it this way. You're getting the Nets show early. Alright. Here's the start of the Nets show. It is impossible to be optimistic about the Nets right now. It is impossible to be optimistic. It's impossible to say anything good about this team right now. I mean, make no mistake about it. The Nets are at DEFCON 2 right now. We're not at DEFCON 1. DEFCON 1 would be Kevin Durant being out for the year and James Harden being a Sixer. We're not there yet. But it's a terrible situation right now. The Nets are in deep, deep trouble. Okay, what's the biggest issue surrounding the Nets right now? There isn't just one big issue. They have 6 huge issues right now. The first is that James Harden may be a 76er. I know that Steve Nash poured cold water on it yesterday, but the rumors are still flying around. I don't think anyone can bang their fist on the table and say that James Harden will be a Net in a week. Now that's true the other way. No one can bang their fist on the table that James Harden will be a 76er in a week. or even in 6 months. But the point is, it is a distinct possibility that James Harden gets traded. Something that seemed unfathomable about a month ago. So, okay, where is this coming from? 2 places. James Harden allegedly being upset with his role on the Nets, and James Harden's and Daryl Morey's pre-existing relationship. Morey traded for Harden when he was GM of the Rockets. Harden had his best years with Morey. Morey went out of his way to thank James Harden when he left Houston. This really started about a month ago when those stories kept popping up that the Sixers would try to move heaven and earth to convince Harden to leave the Nets for the Sixers. I mean, they were the runner-up in the Harden sweepstakes when he was traded by the Rockets. It was between the Nets and the Sixers. The Nets won. In fact, early on, it looked like Harden was going to be a Sixer. Then the Nets swoop in and trade for Harden. The Sixers never lost that interest. Now, the way I was interpreting those stories was that it was coming from Philly. There were people within the Sixers organization that wanted to sow this discontent. Good for them, okay? They manipulated the media, they fed them stories. That's part of being a GM. Alright, being able to control the narrative. I really didn't take it seriously until the Shams bomb that came out on Friday. That report said that the Sixers were going to pursue Harden before the deadline, and the Nets were open to talking. Like, they weren't just going to hang up the phone. The Nets were mired in a 6-game losing streak. They had just suffered a really, really tough loss to the Kings. A game that they should have won. Harden was inept. Kyrie wasn't much better. That was a tough game. I watched that whole game. So when I saw this, the thought that went through my head was, why? What changed? Did James Harden ask for a trade? No, he did not. Basically, it boils down to this. There have been some concerns about Harden's playing style and how that meshes with Durant and Kyrie. Steve Nash has been unable to find the right balance. The Nets don't have a killer instinct. Like, when they have the opportunity to blow opponents out or to come back late in games, it is really tough. It's a lot of isolation basketball. Durant making his own shot, Harden making his own shot. It doesn't work. Alright, the guy who really should be getting criticized here more than he is Steve Nash. I don't give a damn about anything. The Nets should be better than this. The Nets should be better than the 7 seed. They should be better than 29 and 24. They're in the freaking play-in tournament right now. I mean, they're the worst team in the NBA right now. That is absolutely inexcusable when you had Kyrie Irving available for a bunch of games. You had Harden available for some of them. And you do have a good supporting cast with guys like Patty Mills and Kessler Edwards and Nick Claxton and Blake Griffin and Bruce Brown and DeAndre Bembry. It's not great. There's no superstar there. But here's a news flash. Your whole team is not going to be comprised of superstars. The role players should be expected to step up a little bit. Mills has, but no one else has. Maybe Cam Thomas, if I'm being generous. I understand that he dropped 30 the other night against the Jazz. He had 20 points against the Nuggets. He played 30 minutes, though. You know, he took a ton of shots. How much can I really read into that? I'm not saying Thomas is a terrible player. I just don't think he's as great as some people think he is. You know, I don't think these guys are bad players. I just don't think Nash has done a good job of elevating them. I mean, you remember the picture right after Game 5 of Nets-Bucks where it was Nash hugging Kevin Durant? That's the epitome of Steve Nash's coaching. Have Kevin Durant do everything. Have James Harden do everything. Have Kyrie Irving do everything. Doesn't work like that. There are other guys who need to step up. Nash doesn't realize that. You know, the biggest thing is just the constant shuffling of the rotation. I understand that now, since the Nets have lost 8 straight, you want to change around the rotation. It's clear that what's happening isn't working, but even when the Nets were winning, there was this constant tinkering with the rotation. It just doesn't work. You're not going to get these players going if you do that. Some games Bruce Brown is out of the rotation. Some games he's in. Some games DeAndre Bembry's out of the rotation. Some games he's in. Same thing with James Johnson. Same thing with Blake Griffin. Same thing with Day'Ron Sharpe. It's madness. The thing is, though, that's not even the most obvious issue with Nash. The obvious issue is defense. Ever since Kevin Durant got hurt by Herb Jones, who I now despise with a burning passion, the Nets' defense has fallen off a cliff. I mean, why is it happening? I'll tell you why. One thing that gets overlooked because Durant is so great offensively is his defense. He's a really good defender also. You know, he can guard multiple positions. Here's a guy who can make LeBron James work. Here's a guy who can make a ton of players work. You can make the argument that Kevin Durant is the best defender that the Nets have. I understand that injuries have played a huge part of this season for the Nets. They haven't been at full strength all year. But for goodness sake, change up the damn defense. Stop switching every freaking possession. There were some plays yesterday where Nikola Jokic was being guarded by Kyrie Irving. That should never happen under any circumstances. Why did it happen? Because the Nets switch everything. You have the big man switching on the smaller guy. So the guy who's guarding the smaller guy, Kyrie Irving, because he's a smaller guy, has to go guard the big man. All Jokic has to do is stick his arm up. and he scores on Irving. I mean, come on. You don't need to switch everything. Sometimes you need to. That's why a plus for some players is their ability to guard multiple positions. But have we ever said that about Kyrie Irving? Have we ever said that he can guard multiple positions? I don't want to come off like I'm killing Kyrie, but there's just no circumstance where he should be guarding Nikola Jokic. Okay, that's never going to work. This may be unfair to some people because the Nets have such a bad hand right now. Kyrie Irving only playing road games. Durant hurt. Joe Harris hurt. LaMarcus Aldridge hurt. Nick Claxton a little banged up. But at the end of the day, I think it's clear that changes need to be made. Things can't get to a point worse than this. You need to stop the bleeding here. Is Steve Nash the right guy to stop this bleeding? I don't know. Like, here's the thing. We talk about if the Nets were at full strength in Game 3 against the Bucks or Game 7 against the Bucks, they would have won that series and they probably would have won the NBA title. Well, there's another element to that, though. Maybe in Game 3 you put the Nets in a better position to win. Maybe they're not down by 19 after the first quarter. Maybe in Game 7, you call a timeout at the end of the game and not have Kevin Durant hoist up a bad three-point shot. You know who the only net to score in overtime was in Game 7? Bruce Brown. Okay, that's an issue. That's a coaching issue. I have said this before, and I will say it again. The mark of a great coach is to have his players play above and beyond expectations. Has Steve Nash ever done that? In his 1.5 years here, who has exceeded expectations? Don't tell me Bruce Brown. He's been in and out of the rotation. Okay, he doesn't count. Patty Mills? Patty Mills has started 35 games this year. He's playing 31 minutes. He's being used more than he's ever been used before. That's not Nash being a good coach. Steve Nash is not the reason why Patty Mills' numbers are up. Patty Mills is a really good player. I got him wrong, I'll be honest. I wasn't crazy about the Nets bringing him in, but I was wrong. And now that he's gotten more of a chance to strut his stuff, he's using it. I'm not going to credit Steve Nash for Patty Mills' season this year. Steve Nash is not elevating this team, and we need to have a serious conversation about him. Is it time for him to go? I can make a very strong argument for it. The only thing that's giving me some cause for concern is who do you bring in to replace him? Not Jacques Vaughn. I'm not doing that. Vaughn's the architect of the Nets defense. I don't want him being a head coach. In fact, he can go with Nash. The obvious answer then becomes David Vanterpool. You can make the argument that David Vanterpool's an improvement over Steve Nash. Very well respected. Has gotten head coaching interviews in the past. I think he's a future head coach. But Vanterpool is unproven. It's very similar to Nash in the sense that they were both unproven head coaches. Vanterpool had more coaching experience, but Nash had never been a head coach before he got to Brooklyn, and Vanterpool has never been a head coach. It's why I wanted experienced head coaches. I wanted a Van Gundy. I wanted Mike Brown, Ty Lue, someone like that. Not Steve Nash. I mean, in the Nets offseason preview last year, I mused about the possibility of bringing in Rick Carlisle. Rick Carlisle would be an improvement over Steve Nash. I understand that the Pacers are struggling right now, but I think we can all agree that the Nets would be better under Rick Carlisle than they are right now. Just look at his history. You want to tell me it's time for a change regardless? Get rid of Nash, get rid of Vaughn, and promote Vanterpool? Fine. I'm just saying I'm not in love with it. I'd like the move. Okay? I'd have no problem with it. I could get behind it very easily. I think we're at the point where it's clear as day that Steve Nash just isn't the right guy to take the Nets to the promised land. But if you're going to make that move to fire a coach mid-season, and you have title expectations, I want you to bring in a clear-cut upgrade. Is David Vanterpool a clear-cut upgrade? No, he's not. You want to tell me he'd be better? Okay, I can't disprove that, but you also can't prove it right now. That's the thing. Now, I will come to Nash's defense a little bit. Alex Schiffer of The Athletic said that Harden's frustrations with the Nets have to do with Harden being asked to be the guy. You know, being the focal point of the offense. Being the seminal reason that you'll win or lose. I mean, that can wear on you. One reason that LeBron James left the Cavs for the Heat all those years ago was the fact that he was asked to do everything for the Cavs. With the Heat, he could do a little less, and guys like Wade and Bosh could step up. He never had that with the Cavs. At least the first time around. James Harden had 5 straight seasons with the Rockets where he put up at least 29 points per game. Okay, that can wear on you. All that pressure, never being able to have an off night. I can understand where Harden's coming from. With that being said, though, let's look at some context. There's a stat that measures the percentage of team plays used by a player while they're on the floor. It's called usage rate. I'm sure you've heard that term before. That's what it measures. Now, granted, it's an estimate, but it's a good stat. James Harden is 21st in the NBA when you look at usage rate. It's 28.5. To put that number into perspective, last year with the Rockets and Nets, he was 28.4. Excluding that year, 28.5, is his lowest usage rate since the 13-14 season, his second year with the Rockets. So no, Harden isn't being asked to do as much with the Nets as he was asked to do with the Rockets. He's not even leading the Nets in usage rate. Kevin Durant is at 31.2. Like, people get on Nash for being too star reliant, and that's fair. Okay, he's got to get the role players going a little bit, but when it comes to James Harden, it doesn't track. Harden actually has the same usage rate as Kyrie Irving. Now, granted, Kyrie has played in 32 less games than Harden, but their usage rate is the same, 28.5. Look, if James Harden doesn't want to be the primary ball handler anymore, that's okay. I have no problem with Patty Mills taking on more of that responsibility. I have no problem with Kyrie Irving taking on more of that responsibility. But I really don't have a problem with the way that Nash is using James Harden. That logic just doesn't track to me. Okay, Harden was the Robin to Kevin Durant's Batman when they played together. That's just fact. And even by the eye test, that makes sense. Maybe Harden wants that number to be lower, but realize that's not going to happen as long as Kyrie Irving is unvaccinated or the mandate that's forbidding him from playing in New York City doesn't change. I mean, that really threw a monkey wrench into this season. I mean, think about it this way. Let's say Kyrie had played in October, November, and December. I think it's a safe bet to say that the Nets would have a better record than they have right now. They'd have won a few more games than they've currently won. So while maybe they'd still be on this 8-game losing streak, it wouldn't be as doom and gloom as it is right now. The Nets would still be firmly in the playoff mix. They wouldn't be in the play-in tournament. It'd be okay. Their home record wouldn't be as bad. You want to point to the seminal reason that the Nets are where they are right now? It's not Kevin Durant's injury. It's Kyrie Irving not playing October to December. And that's not a Nets issue. That's a New York City issue. It's a Kyrie Irving issue. I mean, I don't want to get into that whole debate again, but for goodness sake, just get the vaccine. And if you're not going to get the vaccine, then New York City needs to wake up and change that mandate. They're the only state in the union that has this type of a mandate. I think it needs to change. But if James Harden is really frustrated with his role, he needs to sneak up behind Kyrie Irving with a syringe and give him the J&J vaccine. Okay, because that's the only way that it's really gonna change significantly right now. Yes, Durant should be back in a few weeks, maybe a little more, but realize that's a long time. A few weeks in the NBA is an eternity. I mean, to put it into perspective, Durant has been out for a few weeks already. Look where the Nets are. Alright, if Harden really wants that usage rate number to go down, or if he wants to not handle the ball as much. The only way that it's going to change right now is if he plays with Kyrie Irving at home and on the road, and Kyrie takes on more of the ball handling responsibilities, which we know he can do. Patty Mills too. All right, how about a 50-30-20 split between Kyrie Irving, James Harden, and Patty Mills? I think Kyrie would get behind that. I think he'd love the opportunity to show people up and say, you criticized me, look at what I can do. I think he'd get behind that. So while James Harden has a right to be frustrated with his role, it's really not as bad as he thinks it is. But even if that's too much for him, okay, we need to be respectful of that. It's okay to want Kyrie to take on a bigger role. But realize, that's not a Steve Nash issue. That's not a Brooklyn Nets issue. That's between Kyrie Irving and New York City. Sure, the Nets can mediate, and I know that they have. I know that they've tried to work on workarounds, but so far, no dice. The point is, don't get on Nash for that. Get on Nash for the role players not stepping up and the lack of defense. Not on James Harden supposedly being upset with his role on the team. There's no question that the injuries have been tough. Durant out for an extended period of time. Harris has been out for almost the whole year. In fact, he may be out for the whole year. Keyword may. We'll have to wait and see. LaMarcus Aldridge has been out for a while. Nick Claxton is banged up. I understand that those are 4 big pieces on the Nets. But this is when next man up comes into play. There's no one on the Nets who I can say, this guy's a bona fide scrub, in the immortal words of Stephen A. Smith. Get him out of the league. He's useless. He's not an NBA player, with the exception of Javon Carter. Good God almighty, do I hate Javon Carter. But that's it. The Nets have 17 guys on their roster. If only one of them shouldn't be in the NBA, that's pretty good. Again, next man up. Make Kessler Edwards better. Make James Johnson better. Blake Griffin's been better recently. Bruce Brown has been better recently. Cam Thomas has been better recently. It's not impossible for these guys to be doing more. Just because they're better doesn't mean they're doing enough to win. That's the thing. These guys are NBA players. These guys should be doing more to help the Nets win. And they're not. It's not because they're bad players. They're just not. It's because the coach, Steve Nash, is not putting them in a good position to win. He's not utilizing their skill sets correctly. His rotations change every day. The 5 guys who he has on the floor at some points make no sense. There's very little shooting, which just isn't going to get the job done. But even then, you can improve the shooting, and the Nets haven't. That's an issue. Next man up. Steve Nash doesn't seem to understand that. Okay, maybe they're doing a little better. Cam Thomas, back-to-back 20-point performances. Blake Griffin had 19 points yesterday. He's had 8 points in the past 5 games. I'll take that from Griffin. And he's a better defender than people give him credit for. And Bruce Brown has been a little better. But it's not enough. Other guys should be playing better. Guys like Bembry and Johnson really need to improve their scoring. Day'Ron Sharpe needs to improve his defense. Cam Thomas needs to improve his shooting. Kessler Edwards needs to improve his finishing. Yeah, it's tough. No one ever said that being an NBA head coach is easy. But I don't think it's unfair to want these guys to play better than they're playing right now. If you want the Nets to stop this slide and reassert themselves as a title threat and go on a magical run once the playoffs start, that's what needs to happen. It's just that simple. Now, the trade deadline is about 72 hours away. I don't foresee the Nets making any big moves at the deadline. A, they don't have the assets for it. B, that's not Sean Marks' MO. And C, gun to my head, I don't think James Harden is being traded. And I'll say this. Even if James Harden does have his heart set on being a 76er, there's a part of me that would still want Harden to finish out the year here. Because regardless of the trade that the Nets pull off to get Harden to Philly, even if it's my ideal trade, and I'll get into it in a little bit, that trade still makes them worse. James Harden is a better player than Ben Simmons. James Harden is a better player than Ben Simmons, plus insert role players here. So no, I really think Harden is going to finish out the year with the Nets. Will he be here in 6 months? God only knows. But I do expect him to finish out the year in Brooklyn. And that's what I sincerely want. The only outside additions that the Nets are going to get are going to come from the buyout market. And again, God only knows who's going to get bought out. But I'll say this, the Nets need to be in on everyone. Literally everyone. I don't care about positions. If you're a good NBA player, come to Brooklyn. The Nets can't afford to be specific right now. Let me just add talent. Let me bring guys in who can play, and I'll worry about the rotations later. I mean, the Nets do have a couple roster spots that they can clear. Javon Carter's useless, and Paul Millsap wants out. So those guys may go at the trade deadline, but they're not going to get you anything valuable. The benefit of trading them is opening up 2 roster spots, one of which will be used on Kessler Edwards. So you're really only left with 1 roster spot for a buyout guy. Maybe only 1 really good player becomes available that wants to come to Brooklyn. If there's a second one, you find a spot for him. Not to get into specific names, but if it's a clear-cut upgrade, you've got to find a way to get it done. So, okay. Here's my ideal trade for the Nets to get James Harden to Philly. And again, just to repeat, in a perfect world, this is not what I would want to have happen. But it is making lemonade out of lemons. Here's the trade. James Harden and Javon Carter go to the Sixers for Ben Simmons, Matisse Thybulle, Tyrese Maxey, and draft picks. I'm not sure exactly how many draft picks. At the end of the day, that's up for negotiation. I just need Simmons, Thybulle, and Maxey. Simmons would have to go in the deal just to make the salaries work. As for Thybulle and Maxey, it's kind of funny. Keith Pompey of the Philadelphia Inquirer said that the Sixers aren't willing to include Maxey in any trade, and Thybulle is close to untouchable. Well, wait a minute. If the Nets are going to give up James Harden, they're going to need some significant assets going their way. And I don't view Sixers draft picks as something significant. It's nice, they need to be included, but they can't be a substantial part of the deal. They've got to be like a sweetener. Maxey and Thybulle need to be in this deal. Okay? That is non-negotiable. And if the Sixers say no, okay, Harden stays with the Nets. Like I said, worst case scenario, I'll make one last big title run with him. If it works out, fantastic. If it doesn't, c'est la vie. I'd still want Harden back, but if he signs with the Sixers, I gave winning a title my best shot. Okay, the Nets are in the driver's seat here. Make no mistake about it. With the roster the Sixers currently have, they're not winning a title. With the roster the Nets currently have, once everyone comes back, even if I'm excluding Joe Harris, the Nets can win a title. Because I really think before the playoffs start, Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, will change the mandate. I have no inside sources on that. That's just what I truly believe in my heart of hearts. I mean, it's funny. Pompey said that the Sixers asked the Nets last month if they were interested in Paul Reed and Isaiah Joe. No! Are you kidding me? That may be the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Paul Reed and Isaiah Joe? No! No, 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 no! I have a guy with a similar skill set to Reed in Day'Ron Sharpe. And you know what? I can find guys like him anywhere. So no, Paul Reed does nothing for me. And Isaiah Joe really isn't that good. So no, those guys do nothing for me. Also, just to clarify, that trade, Harden and Carter for Simmons, Thybulle, Maxey, and picks, works, according to ESPN's NBA Trade Machine. You may have noticed I didn't include Seth Curry. I like Seth Curry. I'm not going to say a bad word about him. Excellent three-point shooter. But at the end of the day, you have a guy similar to Seth Curry in Joe Harris. In fact, I think Harris is better than Curry. Patty Mills is a little similar to Curry also. See, Seth Curry being in that trade indicates that the Nets are still trying to go for it this year. What did I say before? Any trade involving the Nets moving on from James Harden makes them worse. So I don't feel a burning desire to go for a title this year if you're trading James Harden. Next year, yeah, bring Kyrie back. Hopefully Maxey gets better. Hopefully Thibault gets better. Hopefully Harris can stay healthy. Hopefully Cam Thomas gets better. Hopefully Day'Ron Sharpe gets better. Hopefully Kessler Edwards gets better. You've got something there. But I don't feel a burning desire to go for it this year if you're going to trade James Harden. If the move happens in the offseason, in a sign-and trade, I'll take Seth Curry. And if the Sixers want to throw Curry into the deal, I have no problem with that. He's just not a necessity to me. As far as how the rotation would look after that trade, I have no idea. It really doesn't matter. If you're trading James Harden, you just get the best package possible and you figure the rest out later. I'm not even sure where Simmons would play. Would he play the 1? Would he play the 3? Would he play the 4? I really have no idea. Again, though, gun to my head, I really think that James Harden's gonna stay with the Nets for the rest of this year. As far as next year, I can't make a prediction. I hope he's back with the Nets, but I wouldn't put any money on that. Alright, now for the second part of this show. The other sports news. I'll stay in the NBA with a trade involving a former Net. Caris LeVert got traded to the Cavaliers along with the Heat's second rounder this year. In exchange, the Pacers are getting Ricky Rubio, who's out for the year. He just had to be included to match salaries. The Cavs lottery protected first rounder this year. So, in other words, the Pacers are getting the Cavs first rounder this year because the Cavs are making the playoffs. Okay, there's no question about that. The Rockets second rounder this year, and the Jazz's second rounder in 2027. So it's LeVert and a second for Rubio, a first, and 2 seconds. And I've got to say, this is a really even trade. I like this trade for both sides. With the Nets in freefall right now, the Eastern Conference is wide open. Make no mistake about it, the Cavs are firmly in the mix for the Eastern Conference title. They're the 4 seed right now, but they're only a game behind the Heat for the 1st seed. The East is so blasted tight right now. So with that window presenting itself to go for a title, to make a big run, give Kobe Altman credit for being willing to go all in and make a serious go at this thing. I mean, I like Caris LeVert a lot. Obviously, I remember him with the Nets vividly. It wasn't that long ago that he was in net. He was traded in the James Harden trade. The Rockets didn't want him, so they sent him to the Pacers. The Pacers have had a dreadful season so far. They're 19-36. They've been besieged by injuries. We knew that the Pacers were willing to blow things up. Caris LeVert is probably going to be the first of numerous Pacers to go before Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And I love his fit on this Cavs team. The Cavs really needed guard help. Colin Sexton's out for the year, as is Ricky Rubio. I know they traded for Rajon Rondo, but they still could have used another guard. Enter Caris LeVert. Someone who's having a really, really good season this year. He's averaging 18.7 points per game, 3.8 rebounds per game, and 4.4 assists per game. He's shooting 44.7% from the field, only 32.3% from beyond the arc, but he's never been a great three-point shooter. He can play the 1, he can play the 2, or he can play the 3. I mean, think about this starting lineup for a minute. Darius Garland, Caris LeVert, Lauri Markkanen, Evan Mobley, and Jarrett Allen. That's insane. That starting lineup just got scary. All due respect to Isaac Okoro. Alright, really good player. I do like him. But in a perfect world, would he be starting if you're a title contender? The answer is no. And with the Nets struggling, and with this trade, the Cleveland Cavaliers are now a title contender. I'm not saying they're going to win it, but they're in the mix. There's no question about that. And their bench is really good too. You've got Rondo coming off the bench. Isaac Okoro now comes off the bench. Dean Wade is a really good player. And Kevin Love is going to get 6th Man of the Year votes this year. Does that 9-man rotation have any holes? The answer is no. The Cavs just got scary. They just got a lot scarier. As for the Pacers, they got what they wanted. We've known for a while that they wanted to blow things up and get younger and add picks. Well, they did. They got a guy in Ricky Rubio who they can move on from very easily in the offseason. He was only included for salary matching purposes, so the Pacers just saved a ton of money. They got a first-round pick. They moved up in the second round. The Rockets' pick will be higher than the Heat's pick. And they got a second-rounder in 2027. This trade makes perfect sense for the Pacers. The reality is this is an even trade. I know it's really easy to look at the Cavs right now and say, oh my god, they won it. They just got a lot better. And I wouldn't begrudge you for saying that because they did just get really scary. But don't diminish what the Pacers did here. They've wanted to blow things up for a while. And they started the blow up with a really good trade for them. Getting an extra first, clearing money, moving up in the second round, and adding another second down the line. This is a very, very even trade. Great job by both teams. I'll close this show out with some NFL Valk talk. Specifically with Mike McDaniel being named the Dolphins' next head coach. And I'm not in love with this move. I don't hate it, but I don't love it. I mean, Mike McDaniel has only been an offensive coordinator for 1 year. He was the offensive coordinator for the Niners last year. Now, the Niners had a really good offense last year. I mean, they obviously did. They made the NFC title game. Jimmy Garoppolo didn't have a bad season. Wasn't great, but wasn't terrible. I've said this before, I'll say it again. He's better than people give him credit for. Elijah Mitchell had a really good season. The way that Deebo Samuel was used was absolutely perfect. George Kittle had a really good season. Brandon Ayuk got going as the season progressed. My issue has nothing to do with the 49ers last year. My issue is with McDaniel's inexperience. This guy has never called plays before. This guy has only been an offensive coordinator for 1 year. What are his qualifications for being a head coach? This would be the equivalent of the Dolphins looking at Mike LaFleur and saying, you know what? We really liked how Zach Wilson played toward the end of the season. We really liked how Elijah Moore came along. We really liked how Michael Carter looked. We're going to bring in LaFleur as our next head coach. LaFleur and McDaniel have the same qualifications. I understand that McDaniel was part of a better team, but how much input did he really have with the Niners? Probably not much, right? I think that's fair to say. I mean, I understand why the Dolphins hired him. He is biracial, so they probably think that lessens the PR outcry over them firing Brian Flores. But two things. Firstly, no, it doesn't. And secondly, if we're looking at it that way, how do you look at Mike McDaniel and say he's a better head coach than Brian Flores? That makes no sense. I mean, I understand the Shanahan offense, and you think that will benefit Tua, and I agree with that, okay? I like Tua, I've said that in the past. And I think the Shanahan offense will work perfectly with his skill set. But there were better head coaches out there. You could have never fired Flores. That would have worked. But if you had your heart set on firing him, Brian Daboll would have made perfect sense. At one point in time, he was viewed as the favorite for that job. You could have made a strong argument for Leslie Frazier. You could have interviewed Eric Bieniemy. You could have interviewed Matt Eberflus. I'm not in love with this hire. I'm not going to kill it because I understand the logic. The logic makes sense. You think the Shanahan offense will get to the next level. And I agree with that. I think the Shanahan offense is perfectly suited for Tua. But that doesn't mean you hire someone with only 1 year of offensive coordinator experience and no years of play calling experience. I'm not in love with this move. I don't hate it. But I think there were better ways for the Dolphins to go. In breaking news, the Texans have their new head coach. Lovie Smith is a head coach once again. He was promoted from defensive coordinator of the Texans to head coach of the Texans. So, just to be clear, the Texans fired David Culley after 1 year, after the Texans overachieved by going 4-13, but brought in his defensive coordinator, someone whose defense was 6th in the NFL in terms of points against per game. The leader of a rushing defense that was arguably the worst in the NFL. You want to talk about mangling a head coaching search? This is now back-to-back years that the Texans have mangled a head coaching search. David Culley never should have been hired in the first place. Okay, it was predictable that wouldn't work out. But if you're going to move on from Culley after 1 year, which is the biggest indictment you can give to a head coach, why would you promote his defensive coordinator? If you're promoting his defensive coordinator to head coach, it's clear that Culley was doing something right to you. If you're going to fire a head coach after 1 year, you need to salt the earth. You need to say, we are removing all influence of this guy. Like, we want nothing to do with this guy anymore. But you're going to circle back to his defensive coordinator now and give him the job? It makes zero sense for the Texans. Like, here's the thing. Brian Flores would have been the perfect hire for the Texans. It would have made perfect sense. It would have been defensible to fire Culley. Flores is a clear-cut upgrade over Culley. Then Flores shoots himself in the foot by filing the stupid lawsuit. So you're left scrambling if you're Nick Caserio. I understand that. Here's the thing, though. Yesterday, we heard that Jonathan Gannon was out of the running. Eagles defensive coordinator was considered a finalist. He fell out of the running. Okay, that happens. So it was between two guys. Flores, who allegedly was still in the mix, and Josh McCown. Flores was toxic. There's no way you could hire him. You're not going to hire someone who just sued his former employer, okay? Use your noodle. That would never happen. And it's perfectly reasonable for the Texans owner to say, I'm dealing with one headache in Deshaun Watson. I don't want another headache. I don't care if the two of them get along. I don't want Watson here anymore. So it makes no difference to me. I want to get rid of all these headaches. Let's focus on football. So it seemed like Josh McCown was going to get the head coaching job for a few hours, which would have been incredibly outside the box, and I would have criticized it, but it's better than Lovie Smith. Alright, the Texans conducted a terrible head coaching search. They didn't interview Eric Bieniemy. They didn't interview Brian Daboll. They didn't interview Matt Eberflus. They didn't interview Brian Callahan. It seemed like the job was Brian Flores's to lose, but then he filed the lawsuit and shot himself in the foot. I sincerely hope that Flores was informed that he wouldn't get the Texans job before he filed that lawsuit. if he wasn't, and he was legitimately still in the running, he is the biggest idiot on the face of the planet. You hire Brian Flores if you're the Texans. Alright, I don't care if he's close with Deshaun Watson, and you want Watson gone. You gotta think Caserio could convince his old friend that that's what's best for the team. Maybe that's what prevented Flores from getting the job. He didn't want to trade Watson, and the Texans did. Maybe their mindset changed. I don't know. We'll never know. But I'll say this. I do think the lawsuit threw the Texans into a loop. I think they really wanted him. I think they wanted to try to make it work. But when that lawsuit happened, forget about it. Flores is like Colin Kaepernick. He's radioactive. No NFL team will ever touch him. Am I sure that's what happened? No, we'll never know for sure. That's just how I'm making the puzzle pieces connect in my head. So okay, you're left with two finalists, Josh McCown and Jonathan Gannon, at this point. Gannon's out of the running. Hire McCown. Again, I would have criticized it, but he's better than Lovie Smith. Here's the thing. It's clear as day that you want Josh McCown. Okay, you want him involved with your team in some way, shape, or form. I think you're just afraid of looking foolish. But I said this when the Giants hired Joe Judge. They really wanted Jason Garrett, but they were afraid at the backlash. When they missed out on Matt Rule, Garrett was the guy. But they didn't want the backlash from their fans, so they brought in Judge, and Garrett became offensive coordinator. You gotta be true to yourself and hire who you believe will be the best head coach for your team. Outside the box hires sometimes work. Sure, Joe Judge didn't. But Cliff Kingsbury has not done a bad job in Arizona. He was outside the box. He was an under 500 head coach at Texas Tech. Sean McVay became the youngest head coach in modern NFL history when he took the Rams job. That was outside the box. He's one of the best head coaches in the NFL. If you truly believe that Josh McCown is the right guy, just hire him. Okay, should you have hired him last year? Yes. It wouldn't have been a great look to pass over McCown for Culley. Then you fire Culley and replace him with McCown. But it would have been better than hiring Culley's defensive coordinator. You know, at the end of the day, Caserio can say, I made a mistake. I should have hired Josh last year. We would have been better, but better late than never. I corrected the mistake. That's perfectly fine. But there's no defending hiring Lovie Smith. Okay, I understand what Lovie Smith has done in the NFL. Lovie Smith is not a bad head coach. Okay, no one can look at Smith's career and say this guy's a failure. Got off to a rough start in 2004 with the Bears, but 2 years later, they were in the Super Bowl. The first ever matchup between two black head coaches in the Super Bowl. Lovie Smith and Tony Dungy. I mean, Lovie Smith led a Rex Grossman coached team to within 3/4 of a Super Bowl over Peyton Manning. That's a good job. And after that, Smith never finished worse than 7-9. Now, he only made the playoffs once in his 6 years after making the Super Bowl, but Smith finished with a career 81-63 record with the Bears. History will regard him as a good Bears head coach. Takes a year off, goes to the Buccaneers, fails his first year. They end up with the first overall pick. They take Jameis Winston. They improved by 4 wins. They went 6-10. Winston had a really good rookie season. Doug Martin was an all-pro. But then Smith got fired for Dirk Cutter. That shouldn't have happened. But here's what we learned about Lovie Smith after he was fired by the Buccaneers. He went to Illinois to become their next head coach. You're thinking at that point, this guy's gonna turn Illinois around. You know, this is it. We're going to be right up there with teams like OSU and Michigan and Penn State. Illinois football is here. But Smith fails miserably. In his 5 years at Illinois, he never had a winning record. That was 16-20. He only made 1 bowl game. It was the Redbox Bowl. A bowl that doesn't even exist anymore. Illinois lost the last one ever to California, 35-20. Smith then goes to the Texans to give David Culley some NFL head coaching experience on his staff, but his defense is dreadful. So what did we learn? We learned that Lovie Smith's defense doesn't work in football right now. It worked in the past. There's no question. But Smith couldn't keep up with the way that football has changed. Football is moving to more mobile quarterbacks that can create, who can improvise, who can do things that just leave your jaw on the floor. Smith's defenses have been incapable in dealing with those quarterbacks, both at the college and pro levels. This hire is not going to work. This is going to fail miserably. I sincerely hope that the Texans hire Josh McCown as their offensive coordinator. Because you're going to need a succession plan. It's clear as day to me that Lovie Smith's defense just doesn't work anymore. It did at one point. He's not a bad head coach in the grand scheme of things, but right now, his defenses just don't do what they need to do to be successful. This is a terrible job by the Texans again. Nick Caserio is very quickly proving to be inept at his job. I sincerely hope that he trades Deshaun Watson sooner rather than later. If he doesn't get a king's ransom for Watson within the next 3 months, I'm going to bang my fist on the table and say this guy is absolutely inept. And is the most overrated GM we've had in an incredibly long time. This guy had a sterling reputation with the Patriots. Another guy with that characteristic that fails miserably. Let me give you a rundown of what's going to happen this week. No specific Brooklyn Nets show. I said that at the top. Thursday's show may be a little late. I want to make sure I can break down every NBA trade that comes down the pike. And on Friday, I'm going to do my big Super Bowl preview. I'll give you a pick. It's going to be a lot of fun. Until next time, I'm Jacob Valk. And always remember, if you disagree with me, you're wrong.